Welcome to WANDEROUS, Episode 3, with your host, Andrew Crusoe. When we last left off on Episode 2, I had landed in Gatwick, an airport near London. In fact, Gatwick is sort of between London and Brighton on the southern coast. So I had to take this long-ish, it was about an hour train ride, about $10, into London. And that's fine. But the challenge, as I mentioned in the first episode, was that when I would arrive in Clapham Junction, which is a large train station in the south side of London, middle, I wouldn't have any connectivity at all. I wouldn't have any, just south of the Thames River, actually. I wouldn't have any data. So that meant I had to rely on my phone to save the map. I'd never been to London or indeed anywhere in Europe before. This was the first city of my adventure, of what would become a journey across over a dozen countries. So I finally get into Clapham Junction, this massive, complex station with all these levels, very easy to get lost. Later on, when I went to Tokyo, it would be somewhat reminiscent of some stations in Tokyo, although, in my humble opinion, the Japanese stations are a little more straightforward, but we can get to that. So I get off of the train, and immediately I feel lost. Luckily, there was a conductor or a station attendant nearby, and I said, how do I get, I think I'm going to Falcon Road. So he points me, he's like, well, we gotta go to Grant Road, and you're gonna take. Now I look at my phone, and I have a map downloaded for the most part, and I've also written down turn-by-turn directions in a worst-case scenario, right? But this guy was really nice, and I was just able to tap my card and get charged. I didn't really have a Oyster card yet. That's what the Metro card's called in London. And I start walking down the road, and I gotta tell you, I was walking down the road and I was kind of shocked, because for my entire life, I'd heard people whinge and complain about how terrible London weather is. I have this beautiful photo, and perhaps I'll heart it and I'll put it in there. You can see pristine blue sky. It was probably, 27 degrees Celsius. It was in the 80s if you're in Fahrenheit land. That'd be a good name for a podcast, Fahrenheit land. We could just make fun of imperial measurements the whole time. Make fun of all the imperial measurements. Inches are silly. So I'm walking up Falcon Road, and I'm stunned at just how beautiful it is. It's June. It's a week before the solstice. I even think there were birds. And there's this background anxiety, which, as you'll learn from this show, I suffer from a lot of background anxiety. It's gotten better. Meditation's help. We'll talk about it. And I finally make it up to the next road, a bit busier road, and I'm really hoping that I'm going the right way, because if I get lost, I'm screwed. I'm a little bit screwed, because I have the address of this place, but I don't know. I don't know where I am, and I don't know how helpful random people on the street might be, and if I'll get more lost. I mean, there was some uncertainty. There was definitely some concern there. I pass by all this construction, and I have to go down this side road, and I'm not quite in the middle of nowhere, but I don't quite know where I am. And then I see a landmark that looks familiar, because I did some street viewing on Google Maps beforehand, and I make it to what seems to be the correct apartment building. Now, I still have no way of contacting him, but he said, my couch surfing host, that is. If you haven't listened to episode 1 and 2, I really recommend that you do. It'll give you context. But basically, I was couch surfing. I was staying for free with someone who who had tons of references. Couchsurfing.com, which I talk about at length in the second episode, the one before this, is an amazing, amazing travel hospitality exchange site. I've met incredible people. I've made lifelong friends. So you can listen to episode 2 if you want the breakdown of that. And I believe, if I recall correctly, I think I was able to buzz him. So I punched in his apartment code and buzzed me up. I get in the elevator, and before I knew it, the doors opened, and I find myself, I get like I think he gave me a nice hug, and he was just chilling. It was kind of a warm day, so there's a little balcony and everything's open. It's a very tiny apartment, like smaller than where I'm staying now. And I look over to the adjoining kitchen, and he's made curry. And he knows, based on reading my couch surfing profile, that I am vegan. So he actually made a vegetarian, like vegetables, and although vegans don't just eat vegetables, there's tons of stuff we eat, believe it or not. And he has made basically a plant-based curry for me. Very kind of him. And he's really cool. So he's from Argentina. And he has my little SIM card that I've had mailed to him. And I'm a bit exhausted because I only slept 1 hour on the spaceship that flew me across the Atlantic. So if I recall correctly, I didn't take a nap that day. He set up the couch for me. This is one of the few times that I actually literally couch surfed. Usually I get an inflatable mattress or a mattress on the floor, or often, believe it or not, I get a whole private room for free. Because the kinds of people who like to use couch surfing, the kinds of people who host, I should say, often have a spare room, believe it or not. Of course, it depends on what country you're in and the economics involved, but often I've been very lucky in that regard. So we talk, and we're talking about his travels, and I realize, wait a minute, like it's like noon, like I have the whole day, and he's just chilling. In fact, I think he told me he was going to take a nap. It was his day off, and I was like, well, maybe I was feeling full of the travel energy, and I was like, I realized from research I'd done a few days before, I was pretty close to several things I wanted to see. And I'm trying to see, how far did I walk here? I had a bit of a hike that day. I ended up walking to the National History Museum. Just, I take the walking path over the River Thames, and there's tons of sidewalks. London is very sidewalk and bicycle friendly, at least the parts that I saw. And one thing I was struck with walking around London for the first time, and I gotta tell you, I was very lucky. I was very lucky in terms of weather, in terms of the people. It was a beautiful summer day, or more precisely, spring day, because I was there a week before the solstice. One of the things I was struck by was how pleasant it was, how many walking paths there were, how easy it was to cross on bridges and things, and also funny little houseboats that were nestled in the tributaries that led off from the River Thames. Like large, I don't even, like as long as a house, these boats that were indeed houseboats, that people would live in these. It's a thing. So there's this whole culture that I wish I had been able to, interact with more, of houseboats and weird old boats in the River Thames. Of course, that river has a very, very long history of development and people. River Thames is also very tidal, which I didn't realize before. If I'd done more research, I might have known. River Thames rises and falls based on the tide. It's close enough to, or affected enough by the oceans and the tides, that it really does change. It really does change depending on the time of day. If it's high tide or low tide. Pretty interesting. One of the first times I'd really interacted with a river that was so dramatically different, because you could tell how different the water level could be based on the strata, these deposits along some of the embankments and the walls. So I make my way with my small day pack now, just feeling so relieved, having dropping off all my crap. And I start walking, and I pass these beautiful, like, brownstone houses. I pass a door that has the number 42 on it. I thought was a very good sign. And after about, let's see here, I probably walked, I was just for some reason, I was just full of energy, even though I was very sleep deprived. I was so excited to have arrived. I hadn't been outside of the USA. God, I don't know. It had been probably about 10 years, and I'd only been to Mexico and Canada. So technically, England was my third foreign country. And I make it to the Natural History Museum, which I picked partly because it was free. And I was not disappointed. I walk into this massive entrance hall with tons of windows on the ceiling, letting in an abundance of natural light, illuminating this just enormous blue whale skeleton hanging by dozens of cords hanging from the ceiling. It takes up a lot of the space. It's definitely the star of the hall. And I just start wandering around. They've got, along the edge of the hall, they've got dinosaurs. I don't know, what's this one called? Oh, there's an iguanodon. Yeah. Oh, apparently they're calling it something else. They're not calling it an iguanodon anymore. It discovered in the Isle of Wight, which is the island that the Beatles used to sing about. And I'm just kind of struck by how obviously very, very old this building is. That would, of course, be a theme. I was coming from a country that was just over 200 years old. Now I'm in a place that's been inhabited, but it's been an incorporated city, I should say, since Roman times, when it was called Londinium. There's a massive history of architecture and culture, much, much older than what I had really had a chance to explore before. So it was really refreshing. Wonderful painting of Alfred Wallace, who is also one of the fathers of zoology and proving things like species evolution and things like that. Tons of beautiful rocks, just I don't even know, like weird copper deposits and stuff. There was a whole, what's it called, the Cadogan Gallery, beautiful things, nautilus shells, took photos of nautilus shells, just kind of a general overview of plants and life. One of the exhibits that I especially enjoyed was a cross-section of this massive tree that would label where the growth points were in history. So they had an area that said, oh, this part of the tree was growing in the year 1400 when Leonardo da Vinci drew his flying machine. This was from 1300 when the Black Death was wiping out a quarter of Europe. This was from 1200 when Fibonacci wrote Liber Abaci in 1202. It was just amazing. Apparently there was a great comet in 1100, and it just goes back and back and back and back, all the way before 700 when Yi Jing makes the first water-powered clock in 725, before the Islamic calendar starts in the year 622, all the way back to the year 557, when that sequoia was a seedling. And that was a bit of a theme for that day, just really appreciating the fact that I was in a moment standing in this museum, walking around, enjoying incredible dinosaurs. There is a remarkable, one of my favorite photos, perhaps the favorite photo I took that day, is a skeleton of a stegosaurus, a beautiful specimen. And I'm just absorbing this as I rapidly become hungry, and rapidly get tired. I'm just absorbing and enjoying this museum that I hoped I would return to. And I really reflected on the time represented there. And I just reflected that I was in a moment between two eternities. So I get outside, and still a nice day. And I head over to a place called Raw Press, which I will give free press to. And I got a vegan burger over there. And they did quite a nice job. A bunch of avocado, and it was just so fresh. London has quite a bit vegan options. I was very pleasantly surprised. Some of them are rather pricey, but if you look around, Raw Press was not so bad. I think it was around what you might pay in America, a little less maybe. And started walking back. The sky was still clear. I went grocery shopping. I had to take a picture of something funny that I saw in the grocery store. You know, there's these bananas called Cuban Reds, and they're like the kind of Cavendish normal bananas you might see, but they're a little smaller. They're more like apple bananas that you might see in Hawaii. Yes, there's a kind of banana called an apple banana, if you're not aware of that. But Cuban Reds, and I think that's what these were, you wouldn't know from the sign. They had a sign on these, they're pinkish, and it just says "Curious Red Banana," and I read that in a British accent, and I was like, yes, of course. The British people would just say, well, we don't know what this is just a curious red banana. It almost felt like it sounds cliche, but it felt like, I had to look around. I was like, am I in a Monty Python sketch? Like, this is not the name for this banana, curious red banana. On the walk back, I actually ran into my couch surfing host on a walking path along the Thames. And he took a picture of me, which is kind of funny, as I was walking away. And maybe I can put this in Patreon if you guys want to see this. It's not the highest quality photo, but it's kind of funny. So after coming across the curious red banana, I basically stopped making memories, apparently. I don't know. I was exhausted. I lost all dopamine in my brain, probably, and I crashed. My brain was completely exhausted after all of the travel. I had been in an airplane for about 12 hours total, I think, to get over there, something like that, at least 10. So I took the next morning really easy, which is a good idea when you do something like that. If you don't take it easy, you are much more likely to get sick. I also did a little bit of due diligence and took a photo of my passport as a backup, which is a very good idea. You always want to have a photo of your passport, at least on your phone. Worst case scenario, you're going to have your passport number and other things like that. And I started familiarizing myself, say that 10 times fast, with the underground. So I took the train down to Tottenham Court Road to check out one of the most famous museums on the planet, the British Museum. And the British Museum is truly massive. It is no less than 4 floors, including a basement. And there's a huge inner courtyard, which was covered over some time ago. Now, I sort of purposefully didn't do tons of research because I wanted to be surprised what I would find there. One of the first artifacts that struck me was this huge moai that was from Rapa Nui. So imagine those large statues that were covered. They just had the head sticking out in that island, where they have the long, Easter Island statue. Just look up Easter Island statues. They had one there, and they had a whole plaque describing it, of course, talking about how the Polynesian islanders would trace their ancestors back to the gods, and that's something that even Bali, I believe, shares in common with this. So really stunning. It just going, especially the back of this thing, was so ornately carved. There was these flowers and small depressions, and it was just sort of humbling. But the thing that really knocked me off my feet, which I had totally forgotten was there, was a rather modestly sized stone, which you've probably heard of. I was walking through the main hall, and I get a pamphlet, and I asked them, where should I start? They said, well, people usually start over there. And I wander over, and I see this object that I've seen million pictures of. And I approach this stone that's chipped on the top, and it's this really funky shape with writing on it. Writing that gets smaller and smaller as you read further down. Of course, I can't read any of it. And I'm just stunned when I realize I'm looking at the Rosetta Stone. The Rosetta Stone, the original. If you don't know, the Rosetta Stone is the reason why we can read Egyptian hieroglyphics. The Rosetta Stone has 3 languages on it. It was some proclamation. And, the top's broken off, but it's still this beautiful, I don't know, it's just this beautiful rock. It's beautiful for what it allowed us to do. If it wasn't for this stone, we would never know. We would likely never have figured out what these inscriptions on pyramids and the ancient temples in Egypt, what they were actually saying. We would have been totally lost when it comes to Egyptian hieroglyphics. So obviously it was a bit flooded for attention, and I got real up close and personal. Of course, it's behind glass, but you could get pretty close. You get very close, and just took way too many photos of the Rosetta Stone. And I started listening to one of the audio guides. It was on an app, and I was just like, wow. It really felt like a prelude of things to come. By the way, if you're curious, the top of the stone was written in ancient Egyptian hieroglyphics. The middle was written in Demotic, which is kind of vaguely reminiscent of Arabic. The script reminded me of Arabic. And the bottom was written in Greek, which we know quite well, which was the language used by the government at the time. Yeah, it was pretty magical to see. And of course, I keep walking, and I suddenly feel like I'm in Egypt. I start going further into the museum, and I come across these winged lions, these Assyrian protection spirits. There were a few halls that I couldn't go down because they were closed, which was strange because I got to peer into them, and they looked totally fine. There was no construction at all. I guess they were preparing to renovate them. But unfortunately, I didn't have that much time in my first visit to the British Museum. I had to switch couch surfing hosts. So my first host, I believe he had like a business trip or something. So I had to get out of there. I got out, I got a little falafel wrap on the street and got my stuff, took some more photos from the roof of that place, got some nice photos of the Thames, and made it over to West London, where I would meet, let's call him Mr. P. Mr. P, because I've decided that I won't give anyone's real names on here, much like in 10,000 Hours in Paradise. I want to be able to be totally frank about my impressions of people, and I don't have the time or the energy to go around getting everyone's permission. So I'm going to give them pseudonyms of some kind. Mr. P was from Spain, and he was one of the more entertaining hosts that I've ever had. He was also a photographer, so he took a couple pretty good photos of me, actually. And I think I'll include this photo in for the people who support the show at $10 a month. I'm going to include some photos of definitely photos from the museum, and some interesting photos he took of me. He was really friendly, and he had an entire 3-bedroom apartment to himself. I didn't understand how he could afford it until he told me the building was scheduled to be demolished. And because of that, he was getting a crazy deal. They didn't know when they would demolish it. He didn't know how long he'd be able to stay. So kind of in exchange for that, they were giving him a really good deal. And he was in the process of subletting out one of the rooms, which I didn't know at the time would be a cause of some interesting drama later on. But he was a fantastic host. I mean, one of the first things we did was walk over to a market and get sort of Mediterranean food. We got pitas, we got hummus, we got little pickles. So we had this beautiful spread, and he gave me his office to sleep in. Had a decent sized bed. I think it might have even been a queen size bed. We got the crap off the bed and clean sheets, and I had my own private room on the second floor in West London. Little out of the way, but I was in a lovely apartment for free, and I was so grateful. Even the shower was really nice, great water pressure. And let me tell you, when you start traveling around, you really learn to value the water pressure and how hot the water gets. It's a really big part of quality of life for me anyway. My own preference, of course. And that's something else you learn as you travel, is your preferences will be different than other people's preferences, especially people who grew up in very different cultures. They grow up in a very different culture, their preferences might be even confusing to you. The next day had some nice surprises in store when I got to meet, let's call her Ranjani. It was an interesting dynamic between the three of us, to say the least. And I'll tell that story and many other stories next time.